woman in the puffy animal print vest marched up to the defense table, slammed her designer purse on the solid oak wood, and loudly demanded that the felony hit and run charges against her be completely dismissed. I sat high above her on the elevated bench, wearing my long black judicial robe, keeping my head tilted down just enough so she could not see my face. She complained about how a brick mailbox had illegally damaged her luxury white vehicle, completely unaware that the judge holding her fate was the exact same flour-covered barista she had tried to get fired 9 days earlier. My name is Arthur. I am 58 years old, and while my daughter calls me Dad, the county calls me Your Honor. As I slowly lifted my head, took off my reading glasses, and watched the arrogant smirk melt right off her face into absolute pale terror, I knew this Monday morning docket was going to be spectacular. Before I hand down a sentence that involves picking up highway trash, let me tell you how an $8 cup of coffee destroyed this tyrant's perfect little world. Listen, I just want to start by saying that I am not a superhero. I am not some action movie star who walks away from explosions in slow motion. I am just a completely regular, deeply tired guy in my late 50s who wants to go to work, do my job, come home, and drink a cold beer in absolute, uninterrupted silence. You know that feeling, right? That deep in your bones exhaustion where you just want the world to stop talking for 5 minutes. But the world never stops talking. And sometimes, the world takes the shape of a middle-aged woman named Brenda. I should probably give you a little context before I get into the absolute train wreck of a story I'm about to share. By day, I have a pretty serious job. I wear a long black robe. I sit behind a highly elevated wooden desk. I hit a little wooden hammer on a block when people are acting like children. Yes, I am a district court judge. I preside over everything from petty theft and reckless driving to much more serious felony cases. My courtroom is my domain, and when I'm sitting on that bench, people call me Your Honor. But the second I take that robe off, I am just Dad. I am the guy who wears faded college t-shirts with mustard stains on the collar, old jeans, and shoes that look like they have survived 3 separate wars. I do not walk around demanding respect at the grocery store. I do not announce my title when I am ordering a sandwich. I leave my ego at the courthouse door because, frankly, carrying it around sounds exhausting. My daughter, Sarah, is the complete opposite of a stuffy lawyer or judge. She is a bright, energetic 24-year-old who decided to open a small, independent coffee shop in our town. She poured her entire soul, plus a significant bank loan of about $50,000, into this place. She painted the walls a cheerful yellow, bought mismatched vintage furniture, and learned how to roast her own beans. I could not be prouder of her. She works 80-hour weeks easily. So, on my weekends off, I usually stop by her shop just to see her, buy a pastry, and maybe wipe down a few tables if she is busy. Now, let me paint a picture for you. It was a Saturday morning in mid-November, the kind of crisp, freezing morning where everyone in town suddenly decides they desperately need a hot, overpriced caffeinated beverage. I walked into my daughter's cafe around 8 in the morning, expecting to grab my usual black drip coffee and sit in the corner with a crossword puzzle. Instead, I walked into an active war zone. The line of customers was out the door. The cafe sounded like a jet engine testing facility. Sarah was behind the counter, her hair sticking to her forehead with sweat, her eyes wide with absolute terror. She was flying between the espresso machine, the cash register, and the pastry case like a frantic bird trapped in a house. I pushed through the crowd and slipped behind the counter. I asked her what was happening. Without even looking at me, she practically sobbed that 2 of her morning shift employees had called in sick at the exact same time, leaving her completely alone during the worst morning rush of the year. Now, I am a judge. I analyze evidence. I make logical decisions. The logical decision here would be to apologize to the crowd, lock the door, and tell everyone to go home. But this is my daughter. She looked like she was about to burst into tears, so I took off my jacket, grabbed an apron that was entirely too small for my frame, tied it around my waist, and washed my hands. I told Sarah to handle the espresso machine because that thing is a terrifying beast of steam, silver pipes, and dials that looks like a nuclear submarine control panel. I told her I would handle the cash register and the simple drip coffees. For the first hour, we were actually surviving. I was doing okay. I was ringing people up, making change, handing out blueberry muffins, and pouring black coffee. I was a mess, obviously. I had splashed whole milk on my glasses. I had wiped my hands on my jeans, leaving streaks of flour and powdered sugar everywhere. I looked like a guy who had just lost a fistfight in a bakery. But the line was moving, and then she arrived. I noticed her before she even walked into the shop because of her car. Out the massive front window of the cafe, I watched a glaringly bright white luxury SUV pull into the parking lot. This car was the size of a Sherman tank. It looked like a refrigerator rolling on chrome wheels. And she did not just park it. No, parking requires a basic respect for the lines painted on the asphalt. She abandoned this massive vehicle diagonally across two distinct parking spaces, one of which was clearly marked for handicapped parking. The driver's side door swung open, and out stepped our antagonist. I will call her Brenda, though I am sure she has a name that perfectly matches her specific brand of entitlement. Brenda looked like she was dressed for a safari in a wealthy suburb. She wore a tight animal print top, a massive puffy vest that made her look like a deeply angry marshmallow, and sunglasses that covered 70% of her face. Why was she wearing sunglasses? It was a cloudy day and she was walking indoors. But you know the type. The sunglasses stay on so she does not have to make eye contact with the peasants. She was carrying a designer handbag that looked violently expensive, covered in giant fake gold buckles that jingled every time she moved. She swung the cafe door open so hard it slammed against the wall, causing several people in line to jump. She stomped to the back of the line, immediately letting out a heavy, dramatic sigh that was meant to be heard by every single person in the room. I watched her for the next 10 minutes as she waited in line. She tapped her foot. She checked her giant gold watch. She huffed. She puffed. She muttered under her breath about how ridiculous the wait was. She actually tapped the shoulder of the poor guy standing in front of her to complain about how slow the service was. The guy just gave her a nervous smile and turned away, but Brenda did not care. She was putting on a performance, and we were all forced to be her audience. Finally, she made it to the front of the line. She marched up to the register, slammed her heavy, obnoxious handbag down on the counter, and stared at me. She did not take her sunglasses off. I took a deep breath, put on my best customer service smile, and said, "Good morning," asking her what I could get for her today. She did not say hello. She did not acknowledge my greeting. She just tilted her head back and began reciting an order so complex it sounded like a magical spell. She wanted a venti, extra hot, half caffeinated, half decaffeinated, soy milk, no foam, caramel macchiato, with precisely 3 pumps of sugar-free vanilla syrup and a caramel drizzle in a specific crisscross pattern on top. I just stood there for a second, my brain trying to process the sheer volume of adjectives she had just fired at me. I looked at the tiny notepad next to the register and asked her to repeat the syrup part just to make sure I got it right for my daughter. Her face contorted into a sneer of pure disgust. It was the kind of look you give a dog that just ruined your favorite rug. She leaned in over the counter, the smell of her overpowering flowery perfume hitting my face like a physical blow. It smelled like a chemical spill at a rose garden. She spoke to me very slowly, emphasizing every single syllable, as if I were a toddler who had recently suffered a head injury. She repeated the order, making sure to raise her voice so the people behind her could hear just how incompetent I was. I nodded, typed it into the register, and told her the total was $8.75. Brenda let out a sharp, cruel laugh. She crossed her arms over her puffy vest. She looked me up and down, taking in my messy hair, my milk-stained glasses, and my flour-covered apron. She said she was absolutely not paying for that coffee. She informed me that she had been waiting in line for 14 minutes. She claimed her time was incredibly valuable, and because we were so horribly inefficient, the coffee should be complimentary as an apology for her suffering. I stared at her. I really thought she was joking for a second, but her jaw was set tight and she was glaring at me through those massive dark lenses. I kept my voice calm. I told her that I was sorry for the wait, but we were extremely short-staffed due to illness, and I still had to charge her for the drink. Brenda slammed her hand on the counter. The sound echoed through the quiet cafe. The chatter behind her instantly stopped. Everyone was watching us now. She raised her voice to a screech. She demanded to know what was wrong with me. She told me I was clearly too old and stupid to be working a cash register. She said people like me were the reason small businesses fail. She said I was a completely worthless employee, and that if I had any brain cells at all, I would give her the drink for free right now before she got really angry. You have to understand something about me. In my courtroom, I deal with murderers. I deal with armed robbers. I deal with gang members who threaten me to my face. A puffy woman in an animal print shirt yelling about coffee does not intimidate me. It just annoys me deeply. I looked her dead in the eye and told her she had two options. She could pay the $8.75, or she could leave the store. Her face turned a shade of crimson that usually indicates an impending medical emergency. The veins in her neck actually popped out. She leaned over the counter, pointed a manicured finger right in my face, and demanded to speak to the manager. Sarah, my daughter, had heard the screaming over the roar of the espresso machine. She wiped her hands on a towel and nervously walked over. She asked Brenda if there was a problem. Brenda turned to my daughter with a sickeningly sweet, fake smile. She pointed at me and began lying through her teeth. She told Sarah that I had been incredibly rude to her. She said I had cursed at her. She said I was too slow, too stupid, and completely unhinged. She demanded that Sarah fire me right there on the spot. She said if Sarah did not fire me immediately, she was going to write terrible reviews on every single website, she was going to call the health department, and she was going to make sure this pathetic little cafe went out of business by the end of the month. Sarah looked at Brenda. Then Sarah looked at me. My daughter is a sweet girl, but she has a backbone. She looked Brenda in the eye and said, very calmly, that she was not going to fire me. She explained that I was not even an employee, but just her father helping out during an emergency. And then my sweet, wonderful daughter told Brenda that she was refusing her service and asked her to leave the premises immediately. I thought Brenda was going to spontaneously combust. She let out a noise that sounded like a tea kettle screaming. She grabbed her heavy purse off the counter, but she did not just pick it up. She deliberately swung it sideways, knocking over an entire display of locally made chocolate bars. Dozens of chocolate bars scattered across the floor. She looked at the mess she had made, gave us one last look of absolute venom, and told us we would deeply regret crossing her. She stormed out of the cafe, got into her massive white tank of a car, and sped out of the parking lot, nearly clipping the curb on her way out. The cafe was completely silent for a moment. Then, the guy next in line stepped up, looked at the door, looked at me, and said he would just take a black drip coffee, please. We survived the rest of the rush. Sarah and I cleaned up the chocolate bars. We closed the shop a little early that afternoon. Sarah was stressed about the threat of bad reviews, but I told her not to worry about it. People like Brenda are full of hot air. They yell, they scream, they throw tantrums, but they rarely follow through. I told Sarah to go home and rest, and I went back to my quiet house, took a long shower to wash the dried milk out of my hair, and drank my cold beer in peace. I thought the Brenda incident was over. I really did. I figured it was just another crazy retail horror story I could tell my friends at a dinner party. But the universe has an incredible, beautiful sense of humor. Let us fast forward exactly 9 days. It was a Monday morning. The weekend was over. I was back in my real uniform. I had my suit on, my black robe zipped up tight. My hair was neatly combed back. I was sitting high up on the bench in district court, looking down at the massive wooden room. The seal of the state was on the wall behind me. The bailiff was standing by the door. The court reporter was tapping away on her little machine. Mondays are usually incredibly boring. It is a long docket of petty crimes, traffic violations, and arraignments. I had spent the first 2 hours of the morning listening to a guy explain why he absolutely had to steal a ride on lawnmower, and another woman trying to convince me that the stop sign she ran was obstructed by a surprisingly thick cloud of gnats. Just routine, mind-numbing excuses. I was reviewing the paperwork for the next case on the docket. The charges listed were aggressive, reckless driving, leaving the scene of an accident with property damage, and resisting arrest without violence. According to the police report in front of me, the defendant had been driving a large, white SUV. The defendant had allegedly cut through a residential neighborhood at a high rate of speed to avoid a traffic light, lost control of the vehicle, jumped a curb, and completely obliterated a brick mailbox. Instead of stopping, the defendant reversed over the homeowner's flower bed and drove away. A police officer spotted the heavily damaged white SUV a few miles down the road and initiated a traffic stop. When the officer approached the vehicle, the defendant refused to roll down the window, screamed at the officer through the glass, and then attempted to walk away from the scene on foot, resulting in the resisting arrest charge. It was a serious list of charges. Felony property damage combined with fleeing the scene means you are looking at heavy fines, a suspended license, and potential jail time. I looked at the name on the file. Brenda. I paused. My eyes scanned the details. The make and model of the car, the age of the defendant, the home address, which happened to be in the very wealthy subdivision just 2 miles away from my daughter's cafe. Could it be? The odds were astronomical. I cleared my throat and told the bailiff to call the next case. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open, and there she was. It was Brenda. The same puffy vest, though a different color today. The same helmet of stiff, oversprayed hair. She was not wearing the massive sunglasses, which allowed me to finally see her eyes. They were darting around the room, full of that same arrogant annoyance I had seen 9 days earlier. She was walking next to a very tired-looking public defender. She strutted down the center aisle of the courtroom. She did not look like a woman facing serious criminal charges. She looked like a woman who was annoyed that she had been called into the principal's office and was ready to yell at the staff. She stepped up to the defense table, dropped her heavy, jangling purse onto the wood, and let out that exact same heavy, dramatic sigh I remembered so clearly. I sat there, elevated above her, my hands folded on the desk. My heart was actually beating a little faster, not out of nerves, but out of pure, unadulterated anticipation. The sheer cosmic justice of this moment was almost too much to handle. I kept my head tilted slightly down, pretending to read the file so she would not get a good look at my face right away. Her public defender stood up, cleared his throat, and stated his name for the record, saying he was representing the defendant in this matter. I spoke, keeping my voice deep and professional. I asked the defense how we were pleading today. Brenda did not wait for her lawyer to answer. She immediately leaned into the microphone on the table. She started talking fast, her voice dripping with the same condescending tone she had used on me over an $8 cup of coffee. She said she was pleading absolutely not guilty, Your Honor. She said this entire situation was completely ridiculous. She claimed the mailbox she hit was placed illegally close to the street. She claimed the police officer who pulled her over was incredibly rude and aggressive, and she only walked away because she felt threatened by his tone. She said she was a highly respected member of the community and that this entire court process was a massive waste of her very valuable time. Her lawyer put his head in his hands. You could tell he had told her 100 times to keep her mouth shut, but Brenda was incapable of shutting up. She honestly believed that if she just complained loud enough, the rules would stop applying to her. I let her talk. I let her rant for a solid 3 minutes about how she was the real victim here, how her luxury SUV had sustained thousands of dollars in paint damage, and how the city should be paying to fix her car instead of dragging her into court. When she finally ran out of breath, she crossed her arms, puffed out her chest, and looked up at the judge's bench, waiting for me to apologize to her and dismiss the case. I slowly lifted my head. I took off my reading glasses. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the thick wooden desk. I looked directly into her eyes. I watched her process my face. It was a fascinating psychological event. First, there was confusion, a slight squint of the eyes, a slight tilt of the head. She recognized the face, but her brain was struggling to put the context together. Why does the judge look familiar? Why does the judge look like... And then it hit her. I saw the exact second the realization slammed into her brain. Her eyes widened to the size of dinner plates. The arrogant, smug smirk completely melted off her face. All the color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking pale and sickly. Her jaw literally dropped open. She remembered the messy hair. She remembered the flour-covered apron. She remembered demanding that I be fired for refusing to give her a free soy caramel macchiato. She visibly swallowed hard. Her hands, which had been resting confidently on her hips, slowly slid down to her sides. She took a tiny half-step backward, bumping into her own lawyer. The silence in the courtroom was thick. It was absolute perfection. I let that silence hang in the air for a very long time. I wanted her to marinate in the absolute horror of her current reality. Finally, I spoke. I did not yell. I did not sound angry. I used a calm, completely flat tone. I told her that it was fascinating to hear her perspective on the law. I told her that I found her sense of entitlement quite consistent with her past behavior. I said, very clearly into my microphone, that it takes a very special kind of person to destroy a stranger's property, flee the scene, scream at a police officer, and then walk into a courtroom demanding an apology. Brenda was shaking. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a tiny squeaking noise came out. She closed her mouth again. I looked down at the police report. I read the details of the damaged mailbox out loud. I noted that the homeowner had provided security camera footage of her white SUV plowing through the brick structure and speeding away without braking. I noted the officer's body camera footage, which documented her screaming profanities and attempting to leave the scene of a traffic stop. I looked back up at her. I asked her if she thought the police officer was just being too slow and inefficient. I asked her if she thought the homeowner's mailbox should have been complimentary as an apology for her having to wait at a stoplight. Her public defender looked up at me, completely lost. He had no idea what I was talking about. He looked at Brenda, who was now staring at her shoes, completely defeated, looking like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. I did not let my personal history with her change the law. I am a judge first and foremost. But I absolutely made sure I threw the book at her within the maximum legal guidelines for her charges. I denied her request to dismiss the case. I set her bail at a highly uncomfortable amount. I ordered her to surrender her driver's license immediately pending trial, meaning she would not be driving that massive white tank anywhere for a very long time. I also mandated that she complete 200 hours of community service, specifically requesting that she be assigned to a sanitation crew picking up trash along the county highway. When I announced the conditions, Brenda let out a small, pathetic whimper. There was no screaming. There were no demands to speak to my manager. There was no threatening to leave a bad review. She had finally realized that she was not the center of the universe and that sometimes the person you treat like garbage on a Saturday morning is the exact same person holding the gavel on a Monday. I banged my wooden gavel on the block. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the silent room. I looked at her one last time and told her I would see her back in my courtroom in exactly 6 weeks for her trial, and I strongly suggested she spend that time learning how to speak to people with basic human respect. The bailiff stepped forward to take her fingerprints and process her license suspension. As she turned to walk toward the bailiff's desk, she looked small. The puffy vest just looked ridiculous now. The heavy purse dragged on the ground. She did not look up. She did not make eye contact with anyone. I watched her shuffle away, and I felt a deep, warm sense of peace wash over my tired bones. I called a 15-minute recess. I went back to my private chambers, took off my robe, sat in my leather chair, and called my daughter. Sarah picked up on the second ring, sounding a little stressed because she was dealing with another morning rush. I told her I just wanted to check in. I asked her if any terrible reviews had popped up online about an angry woman in a white car. Sarah laughed and said no, it had been completely quiet. She asked me why I was asking. I smiled, leaned back in my chair, and looked out the window at the parking lot. I told Sarah that I had a very strong feeling we were never going to see Brenda at the cafe ever again. I told her that Brenda had run into some unexpected transportation issues and would be quite busy picking up litter on the side of the interstate for the foreseeable future. Sarah asked me what I meant. I just told her it was a long story, but that the justice system works in mysterious and highly satisfying ways. I hung up the phone, walked back out to the courtroom, put my robe back on, and continued my boring Monday docket with a massive, unstoppable smile on my face. You know, maybe I do not need a cold beer and absolute silence to feel better. Sometimes, a perfectly timed caramel macchiato meltdown is all the therapy a guy really needs.